Hello, everyone. And we have our next speaker ready to go. We've got Topojoy Biswas, and he is joining us from Sunnyvale, California. Topojoy, take it away.
Thank you. Thank you. This is an awesome event at a very unusual time. And I had the opportunity to hear some of the presentations by the previous speaker on a very fascinating subject on face detection of lines. I had never believed I would hear something like that. With that, I'll move on to something more funkier, sports. So I am a part of the Yahoo Knowledge Graph Science team in Yahoo Research. We work on various different problem statements, including crawling, graph mining, but this one is about how we do deeper sports understanding. So with that, let me dive into the presentation. So I'll give a brief idea about what Yahoo Sports is and what Yahoo Knowledge is. So Yahoo Sports has been a brand quite around. We cover a variety of sports news. We cover live scores, live games. We have web destinations, Yahoo Sports. You can go online and you can check it out. Android apps, iPhone apps, very widely used Android and iPhone apps, and also Apple TV apps. So it's the kind of sports we cover are almost all major leagues in US, European soccer, college basketball, football, and varieties. And the things which I have not included is cricket, tennis, Olympics, etc., etc. In terms of what kind of data we have and what kind of services we provide, we have a variety of content partnerships, starting with NBA, NFLs, NHLs, soccers, video on demands, which you can browse anytime. And for NFLs, we have live streaming. We have live scores of various games as they go on, live play-by-play commentaries, and as well live media coverage for Olympics and other various occasions. Now, on the side, Yahoo Knowledge is a platform. It's an engineering plus research platform which focuses on crawling, extracting, and organizing entities and relationships. Entities could be people, places, in our case of this talk, players, sport events, awards, the actions they have taken, the scores they have done, all of that. And we also do deduplicate entities across various domains. For example, if I get Stephen Curry, who is an star NBA player, from Wikipedia versus Yahoo Sports versus another a media article, I will try to be able to. It is our core idea to reconcile information from across different sources. Now, the reason we do reconciliation is that once we can identify a player or a team inside a media article, we could link other rich information onto that media article, such that these players could be browsed, they can be followed, etc., etc. So in the case of sports, our knowledge graph covers players, teams, all different kinds of sports, all different kinds of teams, starting from the usual basketball, football, soccer, Olympic players, cyclists, name it. We cover competitions, like the different competitions like NBA season 2020, 2019, etc., etc. We covered individual games and their scores, and also places to watch. Now, in the interest of this talk, what we had done new, and which is what we are trying to present, is the deep linking of entities like players and teams inside videos of the highlights. And we're going to talk about that in a slightly more detail. What we'll not cover in this talk, which is also fascinating, is how we do deep linking of entities, players, and what's happening inside news articles, so that we can combine information, show multimodal views, etc., etc. Now, with that, let me go into a little bit of experiences and user experiences which we support and which are other complementary experiences from other sports providers. So in Yahoo Sports video experience, this particular one is an Apple TV experience. So essentially you can switch on your TV if you have the Yahoo Sports app, and you might have selected your favorite teams. You will get a continuous reel of the highlights of the game which have happened today, yesterday, or the players in the past or the teams in the past. On the phone, you have a very similar view of looking at videos, scores, and articles, and I'm focusing on videos. You can select your favorite teams and you can follow them. A similar but a slightly different experience from YouTube TV about deep linking inside video experiences of entities looks like this, where you have this the game going on, but inside the game you have different players being shown at different points in time taking different actions. This makes browsing or fast forwarding in a video much more engaging and meaningful. Now to search. Browsing was a trend and search is another trend. These are the two mechanisms of consuming content, usually speaking. So I'm going to point out a few survey results from YouTube, which on top search trends on sports videos. And they start with highlights. People look for highlights of videos, be it the Premier League highlights. They look for funny videos, like somebody fell off while trying to make a dunk, or somebody pushed somebody, etc., etc. So apart from that, they're also interested in the daily interviews, post-game interviews of players and the star players or the players they like or follow. This is to get into the peek into their minds of how they're performing, etc., etc. The other type of videos which are quite looked at are how-to dunk videos. Like once you are a fan of a game, you want to know how to dunk, how to play, how to do a soccer move, etc., etc. And then latest and greatest moments in the game history. And then obviously other sports highlights as well. There has been a very huge growth in NFL highlight seeking in YouTube. And the reason I point out this study, and you can look at them later, is this is a very similar experience and similar kind of queries we get on our search. You have sports search, vertical search, etc., etc. Now, in the context of this talk, we're not going to focus on the how-to videos and DIY videos, but we're going to focus on premier broadcasted videos and what kind of search and browse experiences we can enable with them. And you can take a look at this survey from here. So brief into the data composition and freshness of these different broadcasted sports videos. So for highlight videos, which cover typical queries like get me the league highlights or a game highlight or a particular week's highlights. So these videos, they are basically semi-automatically curated. You'll find them after the game has finished, being posted, onto the broadcasters' YouTube channels, or we have content partnership with these broadcasters. These videos are kind of semi-automatically curated, and they consist of key players and actions within a game. Now, in case of the best moves and the funny moves, they're also kind of the similar in terms of they get posted every week or season. They get curated every week or season. And they consist of typical key player actions across different games, the most memorable ones. And the idea of what's best and what's funny are subjective, but they're kind of covered by what's been written about in the news articles and in Twitter. Finally, the interview videos are all about having one player being focused on, talking about them, and that player also comes and gives a peek into his game. And primarily, what in terms of identifying what's being spoken of in the video, you can look at it from the closed captions of the discussions. So for these highlight kind of videos, they are majorly composed of two different cameras. They're composed of various different cameras, but majorly of two different types of camera views. One is the broadcast view, which almost always has the game clock going on, which is focused here. And the alternate camera views, which is to show you the replays, the close-ups, and the player highlights. Now, when you look at these different kinds of views, which majorly compose the highlights and the broadcast views, what you can to identify what's happening, you don't actually need to look at the entire set of players, which is very cumbersome, and the ball and what's happening in the entire game. But what you can do is just focus on the clock and try to align it to the play-by-play commentary. We have a lot of our own play-by-play commentaries, which we get from our providers, like NBA, NFL's, different soccer leagues. And we'll talk about that in detail and how we align. And once you align, you also get a fair idea of what alternate views are going to be shown and what do you want to expect. This is just the same way a human expects that, okay, when I have a soccer goal, what I want to see a close-up of the player, I want to see a replay of the goal, the ball entering the goal. Or in case of a dunk, I want to close up on the basket and see how the ball entered or how the player was dribbling through. Now, in case of interview videos, you don't need to align to the play-by-plays to move from the image domain to the text domain. You already have a bundle of text to make sense of what that video is about. For example, the closed captions and the titles. With that, let me try to get into the ML tasks which are enabling these video browse use cases. Or if these ML tasks solved properly, we can enable video browse cases quite widely. So as we spoke, if we align play-by-plays, this is a typical play-by-play record where you can see the first and the second and third quarters, the player moving and the time. And if you can if you can identify that and you can align it to the time in the clock, you should be getting a fairly good match of what's happening in that frame. Now, if we do that well, what enables us is deep linking of videos, deep linking inside videos for the browse experiences. Now, essentially, if you do that well, what happens is video composition, the composition of the video is very well understood. What does it have? It is much more than the title and the text, which is available for the video as metadata. Now, when you have a rich understanding of the video composition, you can personalize highlight reels based on these rich content features. For example, I know exactly what all teams are covered in the video, or exactly what all players are covered in the video, or what all moves they are making. Now, in case of video search, the ML tasks which are enabling them are again this identification of the play-by-plays, because once I know I have a lot of content information and I can enable search very richly. Now, the other kind of information, as we spoke, is text information extraction from the text available in the video. That is cues for topics, cues for entry surface forms. And now, with both of these things in place, what you can enable is very deep semantic topical queries, like the ones we saw, like highlights, interviews, etc. Now, with this kind of information, what you can also enable is this kind of a topical search and browse experience. This one is taken from Bing. You can, if you see the Stephen Curry's 3-pointers, if you query, they give results for Steph Curry 3-pointer, deep threes, etc., etc. And you see these results which are coming, which are all YouTube experience, etc. You can enable these with this play-by-play alignment matching and text understanding. However, one thing to note here is if you are deep enough and accurate enough in your play-by-play understanding and matching that to the frames of the game, you can actually give much fresher experiences than 2019 old games. You can give the games experiences of the 2020 games, which is essentially which happened. We just finished a month back. Okay, so to focus on the talk right now, we are basically going to talk about alignment of play-by-plays to soccer clocks or NBA clocks or NFL clocks. The other kinds of extraction, text information extraction, which are also enabling these kind of use cases on top of these identifications, are also there. But essentially, if you do that well, that is identification of play-by-plays for this clocks well, that includes more information for a text information extraction to be done. And then finally, it enables all these different kinds of search and browse experiences. So in the interest of this talk, we're going to focus on doing play-by-play extraction really, really well. And imagine that if we do that well, the text information extraction will work out and these experiences will be enabled. So getting deeper into the thing, what is play-by-play? The play-by-play transcription is basically a ton of detail on what happened in each moment in the game. So it has clock and the quarter in which it was happening. It has the text of which player did what kind of a move. For example, in this case, Gary Panther, he's a newcomer, he did a layup. And if you can identify the clock well, that is the box of the bounding box of the clock well and the text inside the clock well, which has the quarter here and the time here, and if you can match it with the play-by-play, you should get a ton of information about what is happening in that frame. Pardon me. So essentially, it is about identifying time and the quarter with high quality, and then using them as composite keys to extract and match play-by-plays. We break down this whole end-to-end task into two smaller problems. So one is the detection of this object clock, and then text detection and text recognition within the clock, such that we don't mix it up with the text here and the text otherwise in the field, etc., such that we can be very accurate about what we identified as a quarter and what we identified as a time. Because if you see in this work, we are heavily relying on accurate understandings, such that we can map to an entirely text domain and make very bold predictions of what's happening in the frame. Okay, so clock object detection, why is that a challenge? Okay, so if you see, just for NBA, just for the last 2 seasons, if you look at the variety of different clocks which are present, they're humongous. And they vary from provider to provider. They will vary from country to country. And even providers change their clocks from season to season. And so what we do is basically we sample through, we try to collect all these clocks as training data, and we use a open source tool by Intel to annotate these clocks across the video. The benefit, the few details about these clocks are that they don't move like these other objects. So essentially, once you can utilize the default tracking from this open source object detectors and trackers, and that should work out in your favor, such that editors don't have to come and tag every different frame. So finally, once you have this training, once you have these videos, you have to debias them, because some of them are coming from very long videos. Some of these clocks are predominant because the networks are predominant, because they stream a lot of different, like 90% of the content. Whereas, let's say, Fox Sports will be very heavy on NFL versus CNN Sports will be only broadcasting a few of these games. So essentially, you have a problem of setting sample weights for training examples. Okay, so now down to what do we do in the case of fast bound? So essentially, to detect these clocks, what we do is we look at the losses. We use a single shot bounding box detector. That's a standard mechanism and a very fast object detector. Now, in case of single shot bounding box detectors, there are 2 parts to the loss. One is the location loss and one is the confidence loss. So the confidence loss heavily decides the object type classification. In our case, it is just 1 clock, so we don't need to worry about that much. However, we really care about the tightness of the fit of the bounding box, and essentially that's why we bump up the the configurations on alpha, such that we care more about that loss versus the confidence loss, and that, along with the debiasing of the data, trains out well. Okay, so now on to extremely accurate text detection and recognition. Remember, we talked about the text detection and recognition has to be extremely accurate, such that we can jump from this image domain just with the identification of these 2 informations to a completely different text domain, which has a lot of aggressive inference about what is happening inside the frame. So the task is divided into these 2. Like generally, OCRs are divided into text bounding box detections, which are tighter bounding boxes. If you see these ones in green, and also identifying what text is happening. That is text recognition. Now, the problem with this entire approach is that AWS or any other generalized text detector, when you apply default on these clocks, they don't work out well. They don't generalize well. For example, if you see this time, if you apply AWS, it gets divided into 2 different boxes, and it comes out at 4:18, which is not recognizable as time. If you see this extra time, which is the colon will not be recognized, because while training in AWS is general training data, we don't know what that is, but essentially it doesn't come out well recognized in colon as a piece of the same text. And essentially you find out 11, which cannot be undivided as extra. In case of first, the bounding box line passes through 1, which makes 1 not identifiable, and then you identify ST, which is again not identifiable as a quarter. So you cannot use general purpose detectors for them. You have to develop special purpose detectors for them. Now, what do we do? So if we have to detect, do we have to get a ton of training data? Well, that's not the way we would like to go because it's very high cost. So we try to resort to distant supervisions using knowledge constraints about these objects. We're going to talk about that in a bit. So what does that mean? The big idea is that if you know these objects well, and if you, for example, in these clocks, and if you know what constitutes time and what constitutes quarter, then you can write knowledge constraints around them. For example, in this case, we have finitely many detections of time because it's 4.58 or the finitely many detections of quarter, because the way quarters can be written is first, second, third, fourth, etc., etc. Or the halves of a soccer game, there are finitely many strings possible for that, even for time. Now, the other thing about clocks is that if you can sequence them while identifying them. So if you look at 1:12, which is being identified properly, so if you look at surface forms of the clock, this is being identified properly. And the surface form for 114 is also being identified properly. So you can say that these two are times. And so is in this case of this clock. But when you want to so let me actually go back a little bit here, pardon me. So in case of this NFL clock, what happens is there are two possibilities, second and first, or two contenders for the identification of quarter. And the way we would identify the right one for distance supervision and filtering out training data is that the one which is beside the time is the right one, because that's how NFL clocks work. That is the semantics of an NFL clock. Now, presence of contextual objects help us also identify apart from surface form consistency. Surface form consistency would be meaning first, second, third, fourth. Time surface forms could be meaning in, cross, NN, etc., etc. Now, the last piece, as I was previously talking about, is that certain times even these clocks detections become wrong because they have not been trained on this data, and essentially if you use a general purpose detector to predict, you will find weird errors all the time. For example, this gets identified as 7, but with the monotonicity of time in a clock, you know that monotonicity is a feature. If you have 1:12 being talked about here, and you have 1:14 being talked about here, both of which identify as a proper surface form of time, as well 7:13 identifies, but you know that you cannot have a 7:13 in between 1:12 and 1:14, so you know that's something wrong. You look at majority voting and then you reject this sample. So these are some of the methods we use to basically filter out quality training data by using predictions on general purpose detectors. Again, that's cost effective because these detectors are there with you. You can use them all the time. They either are open source, they are homegrown developed, or for free available in clouds. Now, once you have that and you have applied these knowledge constraints, what you do is basically you filter out correct labels and then you fine tune or transfer learn your general purpose model to a domain specific detector. We're going to talk about this in a little bit more detail here.
Topojoy, hate to interrupt. We have 1 minute warning.
Okay. So essentially, this kind of tasks, this kind of things are also extendable to detecting jerseys. For example, you can detect the body parts of a person and say that the jersey text is in between. This whole thing basically is about out-of-domain generalization. Since in the interest of time, let me jump on to the next slide. So the idea basically is to use contextual and accurate text detection and recognition at low cost. And how do we get there? We take general purpose detectors, which are trained on general purpose data and which are in all general domain, and general purpose text recognizers, in this case CRNN, which are trained on synthetic data. And we try to predict target domain labels, which are somewhat right, somewhat wrong. The somewhat right comes from the fact that there's still text inside, so some part of the feature space is still known, and somewhat wrong comes from the fact that where you draw your boundaries can go wrong because the objects are not super familiar to the model because they have not been essentially trained on that. So basically use knowledge constraints to filter the data and then train with correct and you collect quality training data and you train with them further. So in our case, what we use is East and CRNN for text detection and recognition. We fine tune and we basically modify some parts of the data augmentation to preserve aspect ratios, and that gives us the super accurate results. You can look at East and CRNN down the line here. In a very brief, I will talk about the different details of the production pipeline. So we basically start from MP4s, we cut them up into FFmpeg, multi-threaded on FFmpeg to make this super fast. When we get down to each frame, we use our SSDs, which have been fine-tuned on clocks to do batch predictions. Then once we have those clocks, we use our text detections again, which is super accurately trained from the general purpose detectors as a batch manner to get these different pieces out. And once we have them, we match it to our dictionaries to say, okay, that's a team, that's a per, that's a time, that's a quarter. And once we have that, we can match it to the Playbyplays. To end, I would say that this whole idea came from research papers in 2016, 17, etc. This is very avid way of finding, captions of what is happening in a frame for action recognitions. However, to make them work, we had to train very fine-grained action recognition classifiers, or in this case, text detection and recognition classifiers, because the research primarily depends on full games being available. However, in our case, these are piece-by-piece highlights which are more avidly available. But essentially, once you do have very high-quality classifiers, you can use them in production, and you can serve different search and browse cases with that. With that, I wanted to say that we've then extended to NFLs, which includes passes, tackles, draws, touchdowns, NHLs, which have shots, blocks, etc., European soccer, goals, and penalties. With that, I'm at the end of the presentation. Let me briefly present the team to you. So these are we worked on a 4-people team. We are a part of a bigger knowledge graph team, which does various other activities. And finally, I would like to thank Amit, who was the erstwhile manager who started this effort. He's now at Facebook. And my current team managers, who are Nicola and Kostas, who are from Yahoo Research. Now, that brings us to the end of the presentation. Now, if we have 1 minute, I would like to show a demo. Do I have time? Okay, looks like, let me actually very quickly go through. So this is our internal tool. These are YouTube videos. Once you start playing the videos, since we have linked Play-by-Play very internally, if you see, if you click on a 3-pointer, it'll get to that point in the video which has the 3-pointer by James Harden. And further down, it will get you to the next level 3-pointers or the dunk. So let's say you're clicking on a dunk. We know that this video has a dunk by James Harden. And when you click on that, I think you will get to all the different dunks, all the different 3-pointers he has made one by one. So basically you're skipping from one part of the video to the other parts, all of which are kind of 8-second clips, because that's how long NBA actions typically are. And you will see one dunk after a dunk or one 3-pointer after another from James Harden from a given video. So these videos are not by us, so we could even tag them properly. With that, I think I'm at the end of the talk. Thank you.